Trying to lose weight.
now from the beautiful sublime to the somewhat ridiculous. I'm going to be featured here. One day, maybe you may not know this, but John used to play with our ensemble for many years. And one day at rehearsal, he walked in and said, I've got an alphorn, and I'd like to do a song with the alphorn. And he showed us this, and I thought, that must be a soprano alphorn, because I've never seen one this small, quite personally. So then he proceeded to do something that kind of shocked, I think, all of us at the time. He said, well, if you'll just check this out. Yeah. That was our reaction at the time. Except we said people really can't sing. So, since he showed us this alphorn, and we decided, hey, we should feature John on an alphorn solo. So I went up and wrote a little fanfare for the alphorn. And since John is not here to play it, although John is here, he can't play it, so I'm sure he's not working right now. So, a little alphorn fanfare for you.
We are here today to celebrate the life of our dear friend, John Thomas Kinney. I am Reverend Russ Button. I have known John since we were classmates in 7th grade at James Lick Junior High here in San Francisco. John was, not in any particular order, a husband, a father, friend, and a musician. Each of these identities carried a special love bond with it. As a husband, John was Luisa's chosen life partner in love. As a father, John was Jack's mentor and guide on how to navigate life. As a friend, John was a quiet, steady presence we all loved so well and admired. I knew John as a friend and musician, so that will be my point of view in this eulogy. I'll let Jack tell you what it was like to have him as a father. There's something special about being a musician. For one thing, it's an obsession. Nobody becomes a professional musician for the money. We know all those jokes. I often say that to become a professional musician is to take what you do for love and turn it into a low-paying job. You don't do that unless it's an obsession. You can't see yourself living any other way. Those of us fortunate enough to spend a lifetime playing music without relying on it for our living can still suffer the obsession, that love of music, and more importantly, the love of making music. One cannot make good music without the essential element of love. And that is when that is a shared experience, such as happens when playing in an ensemble, then there is a bond between the musicians. It is the bond we musicians all shared with John over our lifetimes of playing music together. Here we are in a church setting. This setting at the end of John's life brings up that elephant in the room. The questions about God, the afterlife, the great band room in the sky. I never knew John to be a churchgoer or to profess any particular spiritual viewpoint or theology. John was a very private man, but that also meant he was respectful of the private thoughts of others as well. I don't know if he was a God believer or not. He certainly didn't talk about it with me. And in honor of that, I won't talk about it here. God or not, the bond of love between John, Louisa, and Jack was as real, true, and tangible as anything physical. I like to say that belief is faith without evidence. The reality of the bond of love in this family and this community is all the evidence that any of us needs to see the reality of that which is spiritual. I think John would agree. God or not, John would readily acknowledge the bonds of friendship and desire to make music. John rarely passed up an opportunity to play trombone. God or not, that spirit is something real. It cannot be weighed or measured, but it is real as anything. John was always a man of fewer words than most, but when he had something to say, it was always worth hearing. We all have stories to tell about John. Once I'm done, you'll be hearing from Greg Gomez and then John's son, Jack. Here's one of my stories about John. I was a high school classmate of John's, as were a number of people here today. For our 20-year high school reunion, I put together a small band to play the old football band game music. John refused to join us. His reasons were his own, and I could not get him to budge. We still had enough players to make it work, and we had a good time. The party lasted almost until midnight. We were having too much fun, so we decided to bring the party to John. We arrived at his house up in Diamond Heights on Duncan Street about 1 o'clock in the morning. We rang his doorbell, and there was no answer. We rang it again. No answer again. So we got our instruments out and played Strike Up the Band. Still no answer. John figured that if he just ignored us, that we'd go away. By this time, lights were coming on up and down the block. Heads were being poked out of windows. Then we started in with the Lowell High School pep song. At that point, John realized we weren't going away. And he knew we had more than 2 tunes in the book. So he came downstairs in his bathrobe and let us in. Party went on for another couple hours, and John was glad that we persisted. Nowadays, services like this are called a celebration of life. That sounds so much nicer than funeral or even wake. I would offer that there is more here to be had than just a remembrance of John. We are also here to celebrate the friendships we have with each other. These long-time friendships are precious, and there are many people here today I haven't seen in years, and I'm sure it's the same for many of you as well. Take the time to reconnect with each other. Take the time to renew the friendship and love you have for each other. The meaning of life is to learn how to love, and more importantly, to learn how to be loved. Ritual gatherings like this are a big part of this learning exercise. So I'd like to close my remarks by asking you to see, hear, hold, and love each other. If you felt seen by John, do that for someone here. If John listened to you, make a point to really hear others. Hold your friendships and love each other the way John did for you. Next up is Greg Gomez. We can find it.
Thanks for this. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge a couple people that were left off the program. It seems that when you call for a trombone choir and you get 12, like there's the stragglers kind of come on, you know, and so there are a couple people left off the program. Jeff Brain and Mario Sternad were playing trombone back there. Thank you. I also bring greetings from one of our classmates, Tessie Albin Smith, in Mendocino County, and she sent this note, and I'd like to read it for you. To family and friends of John Kinney, it's hard to admit we're getting older, old enough to have serious health problems, or slowing down at least. When I look at the enclosed picture of Nancy, David, Stephen, myself, and John, I see us in our 20s, full of promise and confidence and comfortable in our friendship. No matter how long we were apart, we came back together like no time had passed. And we picked up where we left off. Now 2 of our pinochle gang are gone, but not forgotten. John was, and will always be, my favorite all-around mentor for me. He taught me to be non-judgmental, compassionate, and to listen. He would laugh at himself, but never at me. He helped me grow up to be a better person. I will miss our yearly musician get-togethers, but I'm sure John will be in our thoughts and minds no matter what. He is and was one of the really good ones in my book. Love Tessie Albin Smith. And the picture she was talking about, you'll be able to see downstairs in the reception in the slideshow. It's so. That's a G, not an A. With these words, John and I started a friendship that would last over 50 years and would take both of us through many life changes. I was a sophomore just starting to play the trombone after having played baritone treble clef for 3 years, so I wasn't too clear on the names of the notes in the bass clef. John was patient with me, especially when rehearsing this piece. You might recognize that as from Stravinsky's Firebird, played at a sophomore tempo. Okay. I don't think I ever got it up to tempo, but John didn't give up on me. Later in our high school career, John and I drove out to Castro Valley every Saturday for lessons with Dan Livesey. First, a parent drove us and waited, but soon John drove us in his 1963 Corvair, unsafe at any speed. Remember that? One of his favorite games was Freeway, which he defined as keeping a steady speed of 15 miles over the flow of traffic. Jack, don't do this. Somehow, we both made it through high school and trombone lessons in one piece. Playing music was a formative experience for us. We played in the Lowell Band, the Boys Club Jazz Band, musicals, pep band, and the Lowell Orchestra. John almost always sat first chair, and I sat second. We shared the feeling that music is good, and more music is better. We went on to college, myself to Cal State Hayward, John to Indiana, and Juilliard. We both returned to the Bay Area, John in the late 70s, and me in 1980, to continue to try to make a living as freelance musicians. I eventually came to a realization that the big orchestra job I had been dreaming about was not going to come my way, and I started teaching. John and I kept playing in local orchestras, and in a carpool from San Francisco to an orchestra in the East Bay, I met Diana. So John was there with me at another formative time and stood with me at our wedding in 1981. During that time, after graduating from Juilliard, John made the decision to care for his mother Phyllis, who was chronically ill from the effects of childhood polio. I don't know much about his decision to forego his career in music to take care of Phyllis. His roommate, Mark McConnell, expressed to me his surprise at John's decision, but I think not. Mark told me that he encouraged John to go out and keep his hand in music, but caring for his mother was nearly a full-time job, one that he embraced willingly and never complained about. John would go on to care for his Aunt Marion in her last days. This was John's spirit, giving of himself without regard for himself, but concern for the welfare of those around him. John carried on that same spirit when he joined the family club, playing in the orchestra, jazz band, and working with all the members who wanted to renew their skills in playing music. He was one of the founding members of the Ever Hopeful, musicians who had not played in many years, but who John encouraged and often taught individually. John's generous spirit extended to his family and to the many things he did with his son Jack and his wife Louisa. Jack and our kids grew up together, and you'll hear some memories about those times in a little bit. They, Louisa and Jack, wanted much more time with him, but it was not to be. I would like to close with a solo piece, which is what many of us have been doing for the last 15 months. John spent much time in the practice room alone, but we are all lucky that he shared so much of himself with us outside the practice room. This one is for you, John.
behalf of me, my mom, and my dad, I'd like to thank you all for coming, with a special thanks to Greg Gomez, Diana Gomez, David Fairley, Pamela Coxon, Tessie Evans-Smith, and Katie Button, and Russell Button for organizing this. You guys took a lot of stress off of me and my mom. I'd like to share how much my dad meant to me and my mom and the kind of person he was at home. If I could only use 3 words to describe my dad, they would be intelligent, humble, and kind. He was a very knowledgeable person and very well read. It seemed like every week he had a new book in his hands. When he'd watch Jeopardy, half the time he'd blurt out the correct answer before the contestants could even speak. He always had good advice for me and my mom. Even if I try and think back on a time where his advice led me astray, I can't. From my point of view and my life experience, he was the perfect advisor. His humility was one of the things I admired most about him. He was always willing to listen and talk through disagreements. He would never say anything along the lines of "because I said so." He would always sit back and explain his reasoning and walk through why he thought what he thought. He was always willing to take in new information and adjust his opinions based on the circumstances. My father was an incredibly kind and caring person who always had time for me and my mom. When I was younger, he would read to me every night, even into middle school. The only reason he stopped was because I grew disinterested with age. He would watch shows and play video games with me that he otherwise wouldn't have any interest in. The only reason he did it was because I was interested in them. He was a frugal person who didn't like spending money, even to the point where he would eat expired food to avoid throwing it out. But when it came to me and my mom, a budget was never part of the discussion. He helped me start a business, and he was always there for my mom's family. Even though he was frugal, spending money on me and my mom was never a problem. Everything he had, he gave freely and willingly. His time, his emotional bandwidth, and his material possessions were all on the table. Sometimes I'm not sure he knew how special he was, and that will be always one of my biggest regrets. Thank you.
Does anybody have something else they'd like to, I guess Diana does. A couple of things to say.
Thank you all. It's been wonderful listening to all of your music and your words. It feels very, very warm and loving community. It's that great feeling that's going on right now. I thought it would be appropriate to have a female up here. We come from that generation that trombone was only played by boys back in middle school, and the girls didn't go for trombone. We played the flute and the clarinet, and that's changed. I was a middle school teacher for 30 years, and you can bet your whatever that we had a lot of girl trombone players. So I think, Louisa, that's the reason there's so many handsome men in this room right now. Trombone players. Well, first of all, I'm just going to read a really short paragraph from our friend Cindy Carlin, who then became Cindy Pacini. She and her husband are living in New York City now, and the only reason that she knows that John passed away is because of the Facebook posts. So she sent this to all of us. Good afternoon, friends and family of John Kinney. I have known John for decades, and like everyone else, I was shocked to hear of his passing. John was always there for me over many years. He helped me prepare for the single-subject English credential exam, helped me with my theory homework from Henry Onderdonk, and we carpooled to numerous rehearsals and concerts. One night, as we planned our carpool to Symphony of the Mountain, each of us invited one friend to join us for dinner and join the carpool. Was it sort of planned? Yes. Greg Gomez and Diana Winnikin. Well, need I say more? The rest is history. Everyone who knew John loved him, and for good reason. He was kind, patient, polite, talented, funny, organized, gentle, caring, professional, and humble. He never had a bad word or even a bad thought about anyone, and was a great listener. I know that everyone who knew him, whether in attendance at this memorial or not, will miss him dearly. I thank the planning committee for putting this memorial together. And at the end of this eulogy, I ask all of you here today to have a moment of silence as you recall a special time or experience that you had with our dear friend and colleague, John Kinney. Then I'd like to add that if anybody has something that they'd like to share, that when I'm done, you can come up too. I'm going to try to extemporize here. Like I started, I think it's time for the woman's story, and specifically John's wife, Louisa, who came into our lives after all these stories that Russ and Greg told. Of course, Louisa came into our lives before your story, Jack. Anyway, when John told us that he was getting married to his roommate, Louisa Mondragon, who was from Mexico and at the time didn't know very much English, I think, right? Well, Cindy again had one of her famous dinner parties, and we all met you, Louisa. I'll never forget that night. It was a very special night. It was a funny feeling to think of John getting married, because, you know, he's always so stentorian, and you just don't think of him as being a family man. At least I didn't. So we made friends, and I think we went shopping to get you a dress to wear at the wedding, didn't we? It was a black dress, and you looked beautiful in it. The wedding was at City Hall. I had never been to a wedding at City Hall before, but it's really quite a wonderful experience. You go into that beautiful building, and you have to sign and do all the paperwork, but then they bring you under this sort of rotunda, and it's a circular pattern on the floor, and we all gathered around. It was Cindy, and I think Andy, and Greg, and me, and our eldest daughter, Isabel. And I put Isabel in her best dress. It was a red and white dress, and I gave her a basket full of birdseed. And we stood witness to this beautiful, beautiful couple. Both of them, I don't know which one was shyer than the other, but they were both scared to death. And they stood there bravely and beautifully and gave their vows. And then it was time to walk out. And I don't know if they were expecting this, and I certainly hope that I told Isabel how to throw the birdseed. I don't know, did she throw it at you or did she throw it up to land? Up to land, thank you. So we have pictures of that coming down the City Hall steps. And then John took us all to, I think it was Hayes Street Bar and Grill. And we sat around a table and we toasted the new couple with a beautiful meal. And it was, I think Thomas was there too, John's father. Yeah, and if I've forgotten somebody, I'm sorry. That's the first, maybe the second big memory. And then soon after that came baby Jack. And I won't continue to call you that, Jack, because I see a lot of your friends are in the back row there. But when Jack was born, we brought Isabel over to meet her new friend. Isabel at this time was about 7 or 8 years old, and she was fascinated with the new baby. And then started the dinner parties with the old friends. So it was Russ and Katie and their son Joel And it was Pam and David and their son Eugene, and it was John and Louisa with Jack, and it was Greg and me with Isabel, and later on Angelina. When we started doing movie night, we didn't want the kids along. So Isabel, who wasn't all that old, agreed to babysit. I don't really know what went on those nights with the 2 girls and the 4 boys. I know that one of the favorite games was to slide down the steps with cardboard. The cardboard kept them from getting burns on their tummies. So I know they had a good time. Is that right, Jack? Did you have a good time? Yeah. They grew older, and for a while they sat at the table with us, 1 or 2 of them, and then eventually everybody went their separate ways. The last big event, series of events that we had with John and Louisa was Greg and I and John and Louisa started going to the symphony every month for the Friday night series. And we had our regular seats up there in Davie Symphony Hall, and and the Friday night series, I don't know if they're going to do it anymore, but we loved it because it was at 6 p.m. So you would come home from work, grab a quick drink, maybe at the Symphony Hall, and then you would go to the symphony, and afterwards we'd go to dinner. And it's kind of nice to go to dinner after the symphony because you're not rushed. Well, the good thing about John is he knows all the very best restaurants in San Francisco. He showed us some places that we didn't know. And then he always knew what was the best on the menu, and of course, his choice of wine was perfect. So we celebrated some nice nights together, the 4 of us. The last night that we had the 4 of us together was at our house. And I don't know if you remember this, but I do. It's such a signature of true friends. We'd all been through our trials and tribulations, very, very serious ones. And you kind of lose your friends for a while there because you just don't have the bandwidth for them. But we got together there, and over dinner, we started sharing. And I think that it had been far enough in the past, or maybe we had just endured it so long that we knew how to laugh through our pain. And we laughed and laughed and laughed till the tears were coming down our cheeks, because if you can't laugh, all you can do is cry, and what's better? So that is really my last memory of John, and it's a very good one. It's one of understanding, like all the people that have gotten up here and talked about, of true understanding, true acceptance, true friendships. So with that, I'm going to sit back down and invite anybody else that would like to come up and share a memory. We do have food downstairs, so don't make it too long. Thank you.
I think there are only 2 people and 3 people in this room who know who I am. I am John's cousin. Shockingly enough, he had a cousin. He was a very private man, but a very generous, warm-hearted, loving man. I've known him all my life, so I beat all of you. Any of you who knew John's folks knew that John grew up in we'll say an odd household, and John, as loving and generous and humble and intelligent, all of those things terrified me as a child. I didn't understand anybody who was that smart, who did math for fun. This didn't make any sense to me. As I grew older and more confident in myself, I was able to understand John, and we became as close as you can become to a man that is so terribly private of his emotions. He was wonderful. We had, with Louisa, my husband Joe, and I, and our son David, had the most wonderful week in Belize. It was paradisical, as my husband would say. That is probably one of my greatest memories. Listening to him play his trombone for our son and have him, my son, go back and say, "Forget the trumpet, I'm playing trombone," is just beautiful. He's a beautiful man. I miss him, but I know he lives in all of us. He lives in our hearts because of what a wonderful man he is. So thank you all, and I'm so glad that I get to see so many people in his life, because he kept us all maybe in little boxes to keep our relationships so precious. Thank you.
Death is nothing at all. I've only slipped away into the next room. I am I, and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we still are. Call me by my old familiar name. Speak to me in the easy way which you always used. Put no difference in your tone. Wear no forced air of solemnity or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed, at the little jokes we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, and if you want to, pray for me. Let my name ever be the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without effect, without the trace of shadow on it. Life means all that it ever meant. It is the same as it ever was. There is unbroken continuity. Why should I be out of mind because I am out of sight? I am waiting for you. For an interval, somewhere very near, just around the corner. All is well. We welcome you to come downstairs for food and on and on until the keg runs out. If you haven't already signed the guest register, please make a point of doing so. Thank you very much for coming.